everyone. My name is Dr. Melissa Sell, and I am so excited and honored to be presenting at this year's Freedom Under Natural Law conference. Thank you, Will, for the invitation. And I'm really excited because what I share is about the 5 biological laws, and this really is the hidden science. I heard that phrase used by Mark Passio in a recent video of his, and how this esoteric hidden science, this knowledge about how the world works, it's hidden from the average person. And the knowledge I'm going to be sharing with you today has been hidden for the last 40 years. It is the Germanic Healing Knowledge, also called German New Medicine. It is the discovery of Dr. Gerhard Hammer of the 5 biological laws. In this, I'm going to show you how the 7 universal principles work in the realm of health and physiology. So this is Dr. Hammer, and he had an experience. This is what happens when people discover natural laws, as they observe. Stuff happens, and they watch, and they look for patterns, and they see something again and again and again. And so this all started with his profound personal tragedy in 1978. He lost his son. His son was shot. He ended up surviving for a few months and then passed away in his father's arms. And following that experience, Dr. Hammer, who had always been healthy, no history of cancer in his family, he developed testicular cancer. And through that experience, he started to put pieces together, and he discovered the hidden science behind why cancer develops, which is a very specific expression of natural law at work in our biology. So this is what happened. So after Dr. Hammer's son died and he developed testicular cancer, he just knew, he had this feeling, there's a connection between the loss of my son and the cancer that I developed. He started to talk to cancer patients. In 1981, he began working in an oncology unit. And so he questioned every man with testicular cancer. Did you lose someone? Did you have a tragic loss in your life prior to your cancer? And every single time it was a yes. For ovarian cancer, also a loss. For breast gland cancer, he found that it was a worry conflict, something that was profoundly worrying that had occurred. For those that had lung cancer, the commonality was a death fright shock. They thought they were going to die. And so these patterns started to emerge, and Dr. Hammer found that, this doesn't seem like it's happening for no reason. That, why the right breast and not the left? Why the lung and not the liver? He found that every cancer has a meaningful biological purpose. And so this purpose is in the body trying to survive. And so the body is ancient and wise, and that it has these programs embedded into it to help us to survive shocking situations. Just think about it logically. If an organism loses its offspring, your child is dead. What is the biological way to rectify that situation, to fix that problem? Well, to enhance the testicle, to enhance the ovary, to make that organism better able to replace what was lost. For the breast gland, what does the breast gland do? It produces breast milk. If you are profoundly worried about the well-being of your injured child, the ancient biology steps in, creates more breast glands so we can produce fluid, nutrition for your offspring that you're worried about. The lung, when you are in a death fright, when you think you're going to die, the difference between life and death could be having enough oxygen in your system to get out to your muscles so that you can get out of this dangerous situation. So he found that there is a purpose. And he actually discovered 5 biological laws. And I'm going to go through each of those laws and show you where we weave in the understanding and recognition of the universal principles. So this is the first biological law. He originally called this law the iron rule of cancer. And so every significant biological special program, so we no longer use the term disease because disease implies wrongness. It implies dis-ease. Something's gone wrong. There's been a malfunction. But this isn't a malfunction. This is intentional and purposeful. So there's a shock, a biological conflict shock. Now, this is not just stress. This isn't just being stressed out and I'm really busy and I have a lot to do. Oh my gosh, I'm going to make cancer. No, it's a specific thing that catches you off guard. So in a moment, you were not prepared. You were caught off guard. It was highly acute, isolating. You felt all alone. And what happens is the biology steps in and begins adapting. So your psyche Your psyche is not just your conscious thinking mind. This actually is pre-conscious, and it kicks in as soon as it perceives the specific threat to your safety, your reproduction. So your child being injured, or the death fright, or if you've lost something, or if there's been a separation, automatically, simultaneously, the psyche, the brain, and the organ are activated with the biological program that is needed for the solution to that problem. So whether it's, again, a separation, a starvation conflict, a sexual conflict, the body has specific things that it does in the event of certain shocks happening. So what laws do we see here? Obviously, we see the law of cause and effect. Something happens. The biology is a responder, not an initiator. It doesn't initiate just of its own. Something has to happen. So the psyche, again, is perceiving what's happening, and it's setting into motion. The shocking conflict in the psyche initiates the adaptation cascade to the specific tissues that need to change in order for you to survive. So again, do we need more lung tissue? Do we need to widen the bronchial mucosa so we can get more air through the airway? Do we need to widen the throat so we can better swallow something down or spit something up? You can see how profoundly practical and biological all of these programs are. If you've ever taken a bite of food that was too big, you didn't quite chew it enough, and you swallowed and it got like back into your throat, and you're like, oh goodness, this might be stuck. In those moments when you have that shock, your body has the ability to produce more mucus so that that bolus of food can slide in better, or you can spit it out better, or it can widen the passageway. How functional is that? So there's a cause that initiates the adaptation. We also see here the law, the principle of mentalism. The all is mind. It all starts in the psyche. It all starts in the spirit of the individual who's having the experience. We also see the three planes of existence. The psyche is the spiritual, the mental. The physical tissue of the brain is the physical body, and also the organ. So these letters here, DHS, that's the Dirk-Hammer syndrome, in honor of Dr. Hammer's son. That is the conflict shock. That's the thing that happens that sets off this adaptation cascade. Also, in the first biological law, we see the law of vibration. Everything moves, everything vibrates, and our brain has a certain vibration. And when we have a conflict shock, that vibration changes. And so even just a word spoken to you or a phrase can cause a conflict shock, causing that impact, causing you to be caught off guard, and these adaptations to occur. So if someone says to you, you pig, or you're fired, or how about the words, you have cancer? Those can strike fear in your physiology, creating adaptations. We also see the principle of gender. So the brain, we are a sexually dimorphic species. We have the female and the male. Dr. Hammer found that the brain, the right side of the brain controls the testosterone, and it's the male perception. The left side is the female and the estrogen level. And so we can either experience our conflicts through a male or a female perception. A female is born a girl. She sees the world through the lens of the female, which means her initial response is to be defensive, to hide, to faint. Her inner territory needs to be protected. Whereas the masculine, the male, is the offensive. It's the fighting, the resistance. He protects the outer territory. And so that is what is normal. Now, when we have a conflict, the body shifts. It adapts to the fact we had that conflict. So for example, a man with a territorial conflict, his male side of his brain becomes blocked. This is the right-handed, because we also see differences in how we are wired if we are right dominant versus left dominant. So a man with a territorial conflict, it blocks his male side. He shifts into a more feminine perspective. A female, if she has a sexual conflict and it blocks her territorial side on the left, she shifts into a male perspective. And so there's a lot of detail to this particular area of the work, but just to illustrate the principle of gender, the masculine, the feminine, is seen and detailed specifically in this study. Now, the second biological law, this is the law of two phases, and every person with a body needs to understand this biological law, that we have a normal day-night rhythm. During the day, the body is more sympathetic active, fight or flight. So this is when you're hunting, when you're gathering, when you're out doing things, you're more active. The sympathetic nervous system is more active. And then in the evening, around 5 p.m., the sun begins to set, and we go into the parasympathetic, the rest and digest, feed and breed mode. Now, when we have a DHS, so a conflict shock, the thing that happens catches us off guard, the body shifts into heightened fight or flight. Because again, this is an important thing that happened that is shocking to you. You shift into the cold phase. So you have trouble sleeping, or you wake up at 3 a.m. with the problem on your mind. You're compulsively thinking about it. And the compulsive thinking, think about the things that you think compulsively about. It's an unresolved situation, unresolved conflict. Heart races, we've got no appetite, our energy is high. And then when we resolve the conflict, we find the missing wallet, or our injured child is going to be okay. We resolve the conflict. The body no longer needs to be in that adaptation phase. So what it does is it shifts into the restoration phase. So whatever happened during the conflict, and we'll talk in a moment about what can happen. Again, we can build extra tissue. So we can build extra lung tissue so we can absorb more oxygen. We can build extra colon tissue so we can better digest an indigestible situation, or we can widen a passageway. We can widen a duct in order for more fluids to get through that duct. Now, once we resolve the conflict, we shift into the restoration phase. So whatever was done during the conflict active phase needs to be set to normal. So if we grew extra tissue, we now need to break that tissue down. If we eroded cells, now we need to refill them. So this is also called the hot phase. This is when you're exhausted. So again, if we were high energy during the conflict, now we are exhausted. If we, we have also swelling during this phase, our appetite is back up. Again, appetite was down during the conflict. Now the appetite is back up. Halfway through the healing phase, there's something called the healing crisis, or the epicrisis, which is a big squeeze where we're squeezing the fluid out of the brain, out of the organ, which shifts us into the second phase of healing, which is phase B, the scarification phase, which then, once it's complete, we're back to our normal day-night rhythm. Now here we see the law of polarity. So we have the different poles. Everything is dual. Everything has its poles. We have the cold, we have the hot, we have the I can't sleep, and then we have the exhaustion. And again, it's very important for individuals to understand this compass. So I know, oh my goodness, I'm so fatigued and I'm swollen and I'm in pain. Oh, that indicates that my body is in the restoration, in the healing phase, which means that that's right, I was conflicted. I was losing sleep for a few days, and now I'm in the healing phase. So understanding the polarity, understanding how this compass works is very profound for an individual who's navigating their life. Okay, next we have the third biological law, which is also called the ontogenetic system of tumors and cancer equivalent. And so at first, I think I mentioned that Dr. Hammer thought this only applied to cancer, but he found that it doesn't just apply to cancer and tumors, it also applies to a pimple, to a hemorrhoid, to the common cold. And the way that we figure out what the body is doing is by understanding the origin. So ontogenetic, we're looking at the origin tissue. These are germ layers. So when the sperm and the egg came together and the cells started to differentiate, they split into 3 layers. We have the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm. And so these tissues go on to differentiate and become all of your different organs. All of your tissues are built out of one of these 3 layers. And so functionally, there's 4 layers. They kind of act, the mesoderm is split into old and new. The old mesoderm behaves like the endoderm. And so we have the different areas of the brain. We have the old brain, the brain stem. So this is the part of the brain that controls the most basic functions. So breathing and reproduction, that's controlled from the endodermal tissues. Then we have the old mesoderm, which is the cerebellum. That's going to be the brain region that's controlling those organs. So remember, when we said the psyche, the brain, and the organ, we always have a certain area in the brain that has the control center for that organ. So the old brain, the way that these tissues function is during the conflict, they grow, they enhance, they get bigger. So our digestive tissues will proliferate. The lung alveoli will proliferate. This yellow group will see tumors grow, adenocarcinomas, they're often called. We'll see additional tissue growth during the conflict. And then once that conflict is resolved, we see tissue decomposition. So what was built must be decomposed. So that works for the endoderm, old brain, and then the mesoderm, the cerebellum. Now the new brain acts a little differently. This we have tissue loss, decrease during the active conflict, followed by tissue restoration. And so the next layer, or the cerebral mesoderm layer, has to do with self-value, with self-worth, your self-esteem. So when you are devaluing yourself, let's say you're feeling like a bad parent, you're feeling like you're not good enough as an athlete, you have loss of connective tissue in your body. There's tissue decrease. And then once that conflict is resolved, there's tissue restoration. Same with the ectoderm. This is controlled from the cerebral cortex. And so what happens is we lose tissue, a duct that will widen during a conflict. So for example, a territorial anger conflict will cause your bile duct to widen, to get bigger, so that more bile can be put into your digestive system, so you can have more energy to resolve this territorial anger that you're experiencing. So we have a widening of the duct, and then that tissue needs to be restored. And so that's where we are going to see the law of rhythm. So we've got this pendulum swing that manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is a measure of the swing to the left. And so depending on how long you were in that conflict active phase, remember from the second biological law, when you are in the conflict, every moment your body is adapting. So whether that means that tissue is growing, we're growing additional tissue cells, or we're losing tissue cells, depending on which program was activated, which is determined by how you experience that conflict. Did I feel abandoned, or did I feel separated, or did I feel devalued? Did I feel angry? Each of those different flavors, those different vibrations of conflicts determines which of these programs is going to get activated. And so whichever one during the conflict, after it's resolved, we then have to set the tissue back to its normal working state. So what goes up must come down. If we built extra tissue, we then need to decompose that tissue. If we eroded tissue and dug a hole, we need to refill it. And so that's the relevant thing to look at with the third biological law. Next, we have the fourth biological law, and this is the ontogenetic system of microbes. So conventional medicine and alternative medicine, for the most part, believes that microbes shouldn't be there, that there is an overgrowth, or there's something going wrong, or they are malignant, they're in there doing something bad, pathogenic rather, that the bacteria in and of themselves have evil qualities that are going to make you sick. But what Dr. Hammer discovered is that each of our germ layers has helpers, has seasonal workers that just hang out in that tissue layer until they become necessary to help us to set the tissue back to normal. And so when we grow extra tissue, remember the example of the endoderm, the old brain controlled tissue adaptation. So let's say we grow extra lung alveoli because we had a death fright. Oh my gosh, I think I'm going to die. Some wild animals chasing after me. I have got to get out of this situation. The body proliferates additional lung alveoli tissue in order to help us to absorb more oxygen so that we survive this dangerous situation. And then, we got away. We were able to escape. Now we are safe. The body breathes a sigh of relief, and then the tissue has to go back to normal. How's it going to do that? What it does is it activates microsurgeons that live within in the form of bacteria and fungus, mycobacteria, specifically tuberculosis. So tubercular bacteria are extremely helpful. They break down tumors after the tumor no longer has a purpose. Once we resolve the conflict, you no longer need that tissue, so the body decomposes it from the inside out. And that's what bacteria are always doing. They are never the cause of an infection. That is the inversion. And we know that what does the modern system do? It inverts natural law. And so the inversion of natural law is believing that the microbe is the cause of the illness, when it's the opposite, that the adaptation that was caused from the shock that the person experienced initiated adaptation of either tissue growth or tissue loss. Once that conflict was resolved, the microbe is now here to help with the restoration process. And so we got the wrong guy. It's not the bacteria, it's not the fungus, it's not the parasite causing the problem. That the microbe is activated because of the adaptation. And this is obvious when you know the law of correspondence, when you understand as above, so below. What we see in the macrocosm is in the microcosm. What do we see if there's a stump in the woods? What's growing all over it? We've got fungus all over it. What is the fungus doing? Well, that tissue, that stump is no longer needed. It's being recycled. Again, the tumor that had a function, was serving a purpose, is no longer needed. So it's being decomposed and broken down. The law of correspondence. And so we always have to understand this from that greater context. If you take it out of context and simply see someone who is inflamed and swollen and you swab it and you say, oh, here's a bacteria, it's the cause, you're not taking into consideration the full picture. And so the fifth biological law, Dr. Hammer called the quintessence. And this is the understanding that nothing in nature is meaningless or malignant. All diseases are part of a significant biological special program of nature. And it makes sense in the context of human development. We have to think about these biological special programs in terms of thousands of years ago. In our modern context, many of these adaptation programs don't make as much sense because, why would we need to, produce more breast milk when I can just go and turn on the faucet and give my child water, or go to the emergency room and have this, stitched up. The body only does what is necessary in nature. And so it doesn't take into consideration all of our modern amenities. This has to do with our ancient biological adaptation programs. I also wanted to bring in this bigger picture of, the old medicine versus the new medicine, the contrast between this old allopathic, superstitious system of there's something wrong with your body and it's all based in materialism, completely rejects the spirit and the soul. We are afraid of scary invisible entities, scary viruses, scary diseases that we think that can just take over the body at random. This old medicine has hundreds of inconsistent theories about why sickness develops. We have holy authorities that have all of the knowledge locked up in cryptic language in Latin. We have arthritis. Oh, you have idiopathic arthritis. That means we don't know why your joints are inflamed, but they lock it up in this hidden language. Superstitious rituals, barbaric rituals and treatments, medical rites, trauma rites of passage. So everyone is equally traumatized and trauma bonded to the medical system. The allopathic system is all about symptom suppression, going against biology, antibiotics. We want to, suppress whatever the body is doing. And we can see that this makes sense when you have the division of the elite class who have the esoteric hidden knowledge, the hidden wisdom of how their biology functions. But that's not for the working class. You need to just take your pills and get back to work. Their families are broken and disconnected, which is what leads to early feelings of abandonment and separation and the conflict shocks that lead to the diseases that most people suffer from. That's the slavery system, the debt system, the usury system. Whereas the new medicine, and this is very interesting, the word Germanische, the Germanic new medicine, we can see this contrast in the ancient Germanic peoples. They lived in harmony with nature. They lived alongside rivers. They didn't have cities. They didn't use money. They lived in harmony with their natural biological code. And the Romans came along and they said, hey, don't you want to use this money? Don't you want to come to our universities? Don't you want to build cities? And they were like, no, we don't want to have anything to do with that system. And so that's really the heart and soul of where this new medicine, which is really the ancient original medicine, the original knowledge of how the body heals. And that's what the words Germanische Heilkunde, what they represent is this Germanic loving brotherhood, sharing in knowledge, kinship, living in harmony with nature, with the biological code. This Heil is bright, holy knowledge, and sharing that everything is based in nature. And there's nothing evil or sick or diseased or malignant in the body. It's only meaningful. That microbes are helpers, and we all get to learn directly from nature. There isn't a hierarchy of the holy sacred texts. It's everybody learns from one another, and we all learn from nature. It's empirical. You get to observe this law for yourself. It's based in these natural principles of consciousness and consent, and we have birth wild and natural as it was intended. Our interventions we want to support rather than to suppress. And we're not throwing out all of conventional medicine, because there are helpful emergency interventions that are life-saving. And so we don't need to throw it all out. But what we need to do is we need to use it with these natural biological laws in mind. We have harmonious, connected families. We know that it all starts at home with the family, with a child coming into the world safe and secure, not in a state of fear, being monitored and probed for problems, but the understanding that birth is natural. Mothers and babies should be together and remain together. Families should remain whole and intact, and the community should support the whole and intact family. And so that is just a little bit of the bigger philosophical picture of this life-based knowledge of how the body heals. And so to wrap up, I really want to encourage you to study this for yourself. This is not something that you get from a doctor or from an authority figure. This is something that every individual needs to understand for themselves to free themselves from the fear of disease, because often we are just one symptom, one diagnosis away from complete enslavement to a system that does not know or acknowledge the universal laws and principles, the biological laws and principles, and how the body is programmed for life, is programmed for healing. Your body is all about life. It wants you to survive and it wants you to reproduce. That is the life principle. And everything is built around you surviving. Every adaptation is for your benefit. And unless you know that for yourself, fear will take over. And unless you study this for yourself and have an intimate knowledge of how this works in your biology, it's up to you. And so I encourage you, this link here, tinyurl.com/learnghk, is a great resource. You'll find a free tutorial as well as more advanced in-depth tutorials about how all of this works. You're welcome to connect with me at drmelissasell.com. I have a great YouTube channel with a lot of videos. And yeah, this is my passion, to reach people with this specific knowledge of natural law. So I hope you enjoyed this, and hope to see you again. Bye-bye.